Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. We've been looking forward to this opportunity, and I got to say that when I was called and asked to come and looking through the schedule, and this kind of arrangement is good for the church, by the way. I looked through the names of preachers coming, and good job on that. It's just a terrific idea, and I think the church over the course of this year is going to be super encouraged and edified by having a visiting preacher each month, and I'm thankful for my turn in this rotation to be with you this morning. Of course, it wasn't but a few years ago that we were here for a gospel meeting, and so I remember a lot of faces and quite a few names, but if I don't remember your name, forgive me. But it's good to see so many people, good to see so many young children, and it'll be a delight to be with you this day. As you can see on the screen, we're going to have a series today that I've titled Homeland Security. The title itself isn't unique. I think a lot of preachers have used it, but it makes for at least a good series title relative to the idea of things that pertain to the family and the home. Of course, many of us, when you think back to September 11, 2001, it was one of those days that if you are old enough that you probably remember exactly where you were at. And so when the terrorist attacks happened on U.S. soil, you can recall whether you were at work or doing this task or that task. And so from 2001 to the present, certainly in the weeks, months, and years after 9/11, we heard a lot of things about homeland security. And of course, those things were relative to the United States of America. But even in the last few years or months, even to the present, we've heard lots of things in discussion about homeland security. And so we're going to spend our time today talking about various things related to the home and the idea of homeland security, things that we need to secure. So this morning in Bible study, we're going to look at securing the family focus. When I first sent the titles to Nathan, it said foundation, but I'm looking over the lesson, and foundation just wasn't quite what I was going for. And so I changed it to focus. So securing the family focus will be our study for Bible class. We'll talk about securing the hearts of our children during our morning worship. And Lord willing, this evening, the idea or concept of securing our marriage. And so this morning we're going to look at securing the family focus. And I want you to think about your living room, or generally speaking, most people's living rooms. What is at the center of most every living room? The TV. Not generally speaking. It might be some other item. It could be a fireplace. But generally speaking, there's something that is at the center of your living room. And in most living rooms, it's the television. And so think about the arrangement of a family's living room. So we take the sofa. We take the seating arrangement, we take the decor, and it's all centered around the TV. And that ought to help at least generate for us to consider or think about what is it that our lives are centered around. My life is centered around something or someone. That is true of your life. That is true of my family. That is true of your family. And so our families are centered around something. Obviously, being Christians, we know that our lives must be centered around God. And so the things that we do, the way we conduct ourselves, the choices we make, the decisions we make, the places we go are centered around or are aimed at glorifying and pleasing God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and in verse 9, Paul talked about making it our aim to present ourselves well-pleasing to God. And so that's what's at the center of our lives, or should be at the center of our lives. Securing the family focus, Joshua 24:15 is probably the statement spoken by Joshua that most people are familiar with. Matter of fact, this declaration probably appears somewhere in your home. It might be engraved as an inscription on some kind of decor. It might be stenciled. It might be painted. But it probably sits somewhere on a mantle in your living room or your kitchen. And the idea is that you, as a family, you share that declaration. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There's this idea about things hidden in plain sight. And so there's a lot of passages in the Bible that we're familiar with, like Joshua 24:15. And I think sometimes these are the kinds of passages that relate to us spiritual lessons, but they're hidden in plain sight. They're right in front of us, and we know what Joshua 24:15 says, or at least the end of that verse, and we readily repeat Joshua's proclamation. But think about, but as for me. So Joshua's declaration really lends three spiritual lessons. The first one is personal responsibility. No matter what anybody else decides to do, no matter what any other choice a person or people make, Joshua says, but as for me. And so I always think about if I lived in Joshua's day, I'm walking through the field and I come through Joshua's property and I'm going to find a man and his family worshiping God. And that might not be in other places in Joshua's day, but it would be in Joshua's life and family. He says, and my house. That indicates leadership, that Joshua was going to lead his family, in this case, the third lesson, in serving the Lord. And so I think Joshua was a man who was God-focused, and Joshua secured his family. Joshua's family was the kind of family that was God-centered or God-focused. And so we're going to look at three observations or three things relative to securing a family's focus. There's lots of things we could talk about regarding the family. That is troubles, trials, struggles that families face. And so the things that we're going to talk about oftentimes will relate to those things. Things that we are going to face in this life. Now, we won't traverse all of those things, but things that relate to securing the family focus. Let's start by talking about time. And as we go, I'll ask a few questions. If you've got the answer, you can feel free to share. If you got a comment for Bible class, I'd be glad to entertain that as well. And so you think about securing the family focus. If we're going to secure the family focus, one of the things that we're going to have to do is secure our time. Now, what father, mother, grandparent, what adult has not said, if I just had more time? We've all done it. And how about saying that in 21st century America, right? Where life is so fast-paced. I mean, I can hop on a plane and get to Florida in 2 hours. Like, it's just, I can get in my car and drive to Wellsburg, West Virginia in 2 hours. Like, life is so fast-paced. Our schedules are so full. We've got clocks, we've got watches, we've got calendars. At home, two of our children are not with us. Our oldest, Emma's a freshman at Marietta, and Blake stayed home to feed the dog for us. And so two of our children are with us this day. But at home, my wife has a calendar, and every single member of our family has a different highlighter color or a pen color. And if you're like our family and if you have kids, you ought to see the calendar. There's barely enough room to keep up with extracurricular activities, doctor's appointments, this club and that club. And the point is that life is so fast-paced, our calendars are so busy, and they are so full. And we often say sometimes, if I just had more time. Think about some of these concepts. The Bible in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and in verse 1 says, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. And if you keep reading through verse number 8, it just catalogs things, the happenings of life, events that occur throughout the duration of life, that is, this side of heaven. But the point is, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose. This is a passage you probably can recall in Ephesians chapter 5 and in verse 15. Paul says, see then that you walk circumspectly. What does it mean to walk circumspectly? If I'm going to walk circumspectly, what am I going to do? How am I going to walk? Wisely, right? Sure, absolutely. Wisely. And that's kind of the point he makes, that the person who walks circumspectly is a person who's going to walk wisely. What else would it mean to walk circumspectly? Looking around. Right? Being aware, being alert, right? Being watchful. It might also carry the idea of being careful, right? That I'm going to walk carefully, that I'm going to walk with awareness. He goes on to say in verse 16, redeeming the time because the days are evil. What do you think time refers to? What do you think time refers to? Right? Your life. I do think there's an aspect of it that does carry with it seconds, minutes, hours, months, and years. But maybe a better rendering of time would be opportunities. And so you think about life opportunities. And so Paul says, redeeming the time. So I'm at a point in my life, right? We just sent a daughter off to college. Like, it just doesn't even seem like possible. It doesn't even seem real. And so I go back to, say, when Emma, our oldest child, was first born, and then the second, and the third, and the fourth, and how many people came up to us and said, enjoy it while they're young. So we have a lot of parents in the assembly and kids in classrooms, and there's no doubt in my mind that somebody has come to you as parents and said to you, enjoy them while they're young. And what are they telling us? What are they trying to convey to us? It's going to go fast. So I see a lot of moms and dads, grandparents smiling at me because you know, right? You know how fast it goes. And really what you're trying to say is you're trying to warn us. Listen, it's going to go fast. It might not seem like it in the moment, right? Like college was a long ways off. Like, I just found a file in my computer. So when we walked Emma in, I think for kindergarten, I had started a little log, a daily blog, just in my own computer. And I found the very first one when we walked her into, I forgot about it. I just found the file, and it was me describing what it was like to walk her into the first day of kindergarten. It's like, that seems like, right, ages ago, but just like that, it goes fast. Think about sports seasons, right? You got a kid in sports. How fast does sports season go, right? Today's Super Bowl Sunday, right? So how fast did the NFL season go? If you're an NFL fan or a sports fan, you wait for the season to start, and before you know it, it's over. And so when Paul talks about redeeming the time, and this isn't just for parents. I mean, there's so many life opportunities, certainly spiritually speaking, to please God, to glorify God, to be redeeming the time, to be redeeming those opportunities, because they're going to pass. Many things are going to pass. And so think about, as a family, securing our time. How about in Psalm 90 in verse 12? The psalmist said, so teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. We sing a song, take time to be holy, right? So what are some spiritual things we must take time for? What are some spiritual things that we must take time for? You can feel free to answer. Praying. Amen. Take time to pray, right? Prayer is not just something to be done on Sunday, but prayer is something you can do on a regular basis, daily. What else? Study. Study. Let me make this comment, and this came up in a Bible study, and I thought this was a good observation. Daily Bible reading plans. I'm all for them. I encourage people to do them, and it doesn't have to be the Bible through in a year. It can be whatever plan you're following. Certainly would encourage people to read the Bible through in a year, but here's something to think about. You know, you do that every year, and so you just read the Bible over and over and over again. And obviously, when I do that, I become familiar with the people, the places, the events, the books of the Bible. But you ever thought about that if I read the Bible through every year, or I'm diligent in reading the Bible every day of my life, you know what else happens? That when I read the Bible through, I will read it through at different stages in my life. Like reading the Bible through at the age of 42, being married 20 years and 4 kids, is reading the Bible from a different perspective than when I was 20, single, and didn't know quite what I was going to do. Or if I'm 72 and I'm widowed and I have grandchildren. Reading the Bible through at 72, widowed and grandchildren is different than, say, at 50 and married and grandchildren just starting to come. And so when I read the Bible through, you think about what are some spiritual things I must take time for. Take time to read God's word. And do it every day. And do it every day of your life. And you'll benefit from it. Can you think of some other things that we must take time for? Teach our children. We're going to talk about that in our morning sermon a little bit. But teach our children. Teach our grandchildren. I looked the last time I came at some of the lessons that I presented. And one of the lessons was don't forget God. And Moses talks about that over and over again in Deuteronomy. But one of the blessed things that I love about Deuteronomy, if you read that in those beginning chapters, Moses talks about grandparents. And he even says, teach your children and your grandchildren. And so grandparents, more often than not, play a pivotal role in the lives of their grandchildren. And so the grandchildren look up to their grandparents. And what a wonderful opportunity. Think about Timothy, right? New Testament character who was blessed by a godly mother and grandmother. And so parents, grandparents, right? Teach your children. What might be some other things to take time for? Amen. To be evangelistic. I encourage the brethren wherever I go. I need to be able to tell somebody why I believe what I believe. Don't ever argue that you believe something, well, the preacher said so. The preacher might have said so, and he may be right. But that's not a fundamental argument to make with anybody. And so as a Christian, I should be able to talk to somebody. If you wanted to talk sports with me, I could talk all day. I love sports and got other hobbies or interests that I have. And you likewise, whatever interest you may have, you could sit down with somebody and just talk all day about those things and enjoy that. And so I should be able to do the same about things that relate to Jesus the Christ. I should be able to talk about the gospel, the good news of Jesus the Christ, why I believe what I believe, why I practice what I practice. That's one of the biggest issues of our religious society today. A lot of folks genuinely don't know why they believe what they believe. Now, they profess to believe in God. I believe that they genuinely do believe in God. But when it comes to the way they live their life or the way they worship God, they have no fundamental argument for why they do so. They just do it without much awareness. Before we move on, anything else you can think of? What's that? Pray, right? So you think about what's that? That's right, pray, talk to God. Communication is vital. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight in our marriage, securing our marriages, communication. God communicated to us, right? And so we need to communicate to God. Now, obviously, you got things like assembling, right? Being in the midst of God's people, that's important. And it's not just for the kids, right? Like everybody, the family, and no matter who you are, young, right? Experienced in life, to take time to worship with God. And so there's lots of things we could talk about. We could talk about, doing good. I just preached a sermon last week, Here Am I, Send Me, right? From the Old Testament prophet, who was going to take God's message. And the prophet said, Here am I, send me. And so here am I, send me to visit the sick. Here am I, send me to encourage people. Here am I to be evangelistic, right? Here am I to be kind. And on and on we could go with that. And so sometimes what happens is we just give God the leftovers. And so we got the calendar, the days are full of activity, and so we just give God what's left over, if there's anything left over at all. Let's look at a second observation. So you think about securing the family focus. It does not take much for a family to become distracted. Like, I can go to the basement, and I was going to go to the laundry room to get a roll of paper towels, and I end up coming upstairs with who knows what, forgetting the paper towels, right? Like, it just doesn't take much. Or I can set something down, and I just have no idea where I sat it. And so I go ask my wife, and she finds it in a few seconds. But it just doesn't take much to become distracted, whether it's time or whether it's finances. Listen, we live in a society where money's essential. So we have to have income. We have to have money for the exchange of goods. The scriptures talk about finances. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28, Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. And so the Bible talks a lot about laboring. It's part of our duty before God, is that while we're on this earth, we are a diligent people, that we're a working people, that we labor. We labor to provide for ourselves and our family. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 11, Paul wrote that you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. In the last 4 to 8 years, I've tried to take this passage to heart, right, with all the stuff going around in society and the world over and the craziness. Sometimes I just think about Paul's writing, to aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind my own business, and to work with my own hands as we have commanded you. I would just emphasize the idea, concept being conveyed of being diligent, right? Working to provide for oneself and or one's family. I think about in the Old Testament. Remember in the Old Testament, God's covenant people, the southern kingdom of Judah, they go away into Babylonian captivity. They're not there forever. They're there for 70 years. And then there's a group that returns back to Jerusalem, and they're going to rebuild the temple. They're going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and restore or purify the worship. In Nehemiah chapter 4 and in verse 6, it talks about things getting done, the wall being built, the temple being built, because the people had a mind to work. And so there's something to be said about that. That is a person and or people who have a mind to work. If you think about homeland security and securing the family focus, right, we're going to have to secure our time. We're going to have to be wise with our schedule, with our time. We're going to have to be redeeming our opportunities. We're going to have to secure our finances, right? We're going to have to try to make wise decisions when it comes to those things. Paul said this in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10. Everybody knows what he said. He said, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. He didn't say money was evil. Money itself is not inherently evil, right? But the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Do you know what Paul just said? What he just described is a person who's lost his focus. That is when his focus is on the love of money, right? That's what he's describing. He's depicting a person who has lost his or her focus. When his or her love turns from God to the love of money, when those things, when materialism becomes the focus or aim of my life, well, that's the problem. It's not that the television itself is inherently bad. It's not that social media is inherently bad. Really quickly, I've really wrestled with social media. I'm on social media. We use it for the church, and I wrestle with this. It's a struggle. If the bad outweighs the good. Real quick. Thursday, I'm at home in my office. 10 o'clock, my phone blows up. My Facebook messaging, I'm getting text messages. Hey, there's a preacher in Virginia that needs you. He's got to talk to you. I call him. He did a TikTok. Now, if you follow news and TikTok and China and all this stuff, we won't go there. But anyhow, he's on TikTok, preacher. He started making these videos like a month ago, real short, 1 minute, and he does Bible teaching. He might be in his backyard feeding the chickens, but he's talking about baptism. There's a family just outside of Barberton, so we're talking hours, states away, who sees this gentleman's video. At first, she's argumentative with him because she don't think that baptism is necessary. But then he starts pointing out scripture, and she starts opening the Bible up and reading it. And she's like, yeah, you're right. It does say that. I've never been taught this. Long story short, he calls us, because we're one of the closest churches, one of the closest preachers. I call, get a hold of the family. Thursday night at 9:15, we baptized both the husband and wife. Now, this preacher had been studying with them through FaceTime, on an iPad and computer. And so we met Thursday night. We talked for an hour to make sure that they understood what they were doing. But you think about, so as I wrestle with it, I think about 2 people were baptized into the Lord Thursday night because of some video on social media. Paul said, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So we got to be careful. In 21st century America, for the most part, we all exercise a certain level of riches. In contrast to people around the world, most of us have a level of riches and wealth and possessions, and we are a blessed people. And so we need to be very careful about becoming greedy. Here's an illustration that I like to use. That might look familiar. Tupperware sold one just like it, probably still does. The shape sorter. And I think about that little child. Maybe you have a little child, maybe you have a little grandchild, and they're on your living room floor, and you see them, they're taking that star shape, and they're trying to put it into the square hole. What do you know as a mom or dad or grandma and grandpa? Not going to work, no. But you sit there, right, and you watch them, because they're trying, they're learning, right? They're learning to discern. And maybe eventually you go over and you show them just as a mom or dad or grandma and grandpa. But here's the thing about that. That's us. I say us as moms and dads, as older people, adults, right? That's what we do a lot. That is, we take the things of this world and we put them where God belongs. And then we wonder why things don't work out. Why things are such a struggle. Now, that doesn't mean that life is always going to be easy. We're never going to face challenges, those kinds of things. But like when we struggle with contentment, when we maybe do struggle with financial things, it might be that we're trying to take the things of this world and put them where God belongs. And so it's a struggle to be content. If you will, it's not going to work. And so we might be more like that little child in that shape sorter than we would like to admit. The problem is, or it's a warning about losing focus. You go back to Paul's statement about the love of money. It's really a warning about the possibility of losing focus. Think about back in Genesis chapter 17 and 18. Remember when God comes to Abraham, and he tells Abraham that Sarai is going to bring forth a child for him, or a son. And you can recall that both of them actually kind of laughed or mocked God. Remember why? Because they were past the age of childbearing. To be honest, right? I probably would have done the same thing. Listen, they were past the age of childbearing. She was not going to bring forth Abraham a son as it was. But God said, no, she will. And so, right, they laughed, they mocked, but God said, no, right, she's going to bring forth a son. And of course, God had told Abraham, is there anything too hard for God? And so when you think about the family focus, because what's going to happen is the car's going to break down. It's going to happen. Just ask me. 2023 was one of the worst years ever. Like, I follow Dave Ramsey to an extent. I have all used cars. That didn't work out real well in 2023. You know what an engine costs? Yeah, well, okay, I had one of those. Anyhow, so, but guess what? The car's going to break down. It's going to happen. And if you don't know how to fix it, you're going to pay somebody to fix it, right? There could be health issues, right? That happens. Maybe you have to see a doctor or surgeon, right? Home repairs, something breaks, appliance goes down. Could happen. Could be things within the family. There could be some family struggles. Could be job loss, right? Somebody's employment is affected or income is affected. Where do we turn to? Who do we turn to? God, right? It just doesn't take much to lose focus with our time. It won't take much to lose focus with finances. And so the Bible says lots of things about finances. If you go back in wisdom literature, we won't investigate all of them, but the Bible has lots of things to say about money matters. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6, the same context, we talk about the warning of being lovers of money. Paul said, now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. I have heard Christians kind of mockingly say that I'm going to take it with me. And they talk about, well, I'm going to put it in my casket. Well, you can put it in your casket all you want, but for we brought nothing into this world, it is certain we can carry nothing out. Godliness with contentment is great gain. I'll be the first to admit, living in 21st century America is challenging, isn't it? Just turn the TV on. So this evening when the Super Bowl's played, I think they spent this year, I think I read somewhere around $7 million for 30 seconds. But think about in 30 seconds what they've been able to achieve. They're going to be able to achieve to convince people to buy their product in 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, millions of Americans will be convinced that Lay's potato chips, right? I bet you just can't eat one. Remember that commercial? I mean, it still resonates, right? The idea was the potato chip is so good. Their potato chip is so good, you can't eat just one. And so, all right, those who sell products or goods, tonight in 30 seconds, and it's just not the Super Bowl, but anytime you turn the TV on or a radio station, there's a spot or there's a commercial that's selling some good, some product, some item, and they're trying to convince you that you need it, that you want it, that you should desire it, that you can't live without it in some cases. In Hebrews 13:5, Hebrews says, let your conduct be without covetousness, be content with such things as you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I'm not a financial expert. Don't pretend to be one. But I do know this much. You got to have a budget. And if you're a family, and especially with kids, but anybody, no matter who you are, retired or otherwise, you got to have a budget. And I'll be honest, in the last 3 or 4 years with inflation, that's one of the things that's helped our family stay afloat, is just having a budget. Knowing how much money we have to spend, saving, and the expenses we have in any given month. And so I'd encourage people to have a budget. Here's a little thing that I do, and I don't say this because it's somehow patting myself in the back, but on my budget sheet, the first item is collection or contribution. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the largest item line, right? If you got a mortgage, obviously, that's probably going to be your largest item line, or health insurance or something of that nature. But I always put collection at the very top. You know why? It helps me stay focused on what's important. Let's look at the last one. Securing our time, securing our finances, and securing our discipline. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, Paul said, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Now, that's the New King James Version. I preach out of the New King James Version, but in this particular passage, I appreciate the New American Standard Bible. For the English word training, it uses the word discipline, and for admonition, it uses instruction. I appreciate especially the idea of discipline, because if I say, well, discipline your children, most people are thinking about a paddle, right, a belt, or a timeout in a corner, or whatever form of that kind of discipline would be administered. But discipline really is twofold. Discipline, there is instructive discipline. Instructive discipline is preventative in nature. So this is like when we teach our children, right? Like, don't touch the stove because, right, mom or dad just cooked something on the stove and the stove is hot. So we're teaching them. We're trying to prevent them from touching the stove because it's hot. We teach them, right, things about right and wrong. There's also then corrective discipline. Corrective discipline is penalizing in nature. So some rule, some law has been broken. And so there's some kind of corrective measure that is administered, or at least should be. I suppose that's one of the major issues confronting families today. That's why I talk about discipline, because you know when God says he's going to do something, does he mean it? And parents could learn something from God the Father. So a lot of mom and dad say they're going to do something and then don't do it, right? It's like mom and dad say, clean up your room or else. If mom and dad don't follow through, what happens? Well, the child learns mom and dad really don't mean what they say. And so now you kind of have an issue. But mom and dad in some ways created the issue because you didn't mean what you said, right? And so Well, I want you to think about discipline, instructive discipline and corrective discipline. But here's what I would emphasize, that the majority of our time has to be spent in instructive discipline, teaching, instructing, right? Now, if there's a rule or law that's broke, then there has to be some kind of corrective measure. But our time would be well spent as parents to be continually in instruction, right? Teaching, communicating, talking, being that example. Now you think about in the Old Testament, in the book of Judges chapter 2 and verse 10, it says that there arose a generation who knew not the Lord. How'd that happen? How did a generation come about that did not know the Lord? Well, there's no doubt that one thing is that there was a lack of instructive discipline. There was a lack of teaching. There was a lack of communication about, certainly when we think about things of God and the ways of life. And so I would really encourage you, it doesn't matter who you are, whether your children are grown and out of the house, or you currently have children, or if you're young and maybe you're going to be married in the coming years and have children, is to really put an emphasis on instructive discipline, right? It's preventative in nature. And so you do those things. You think about securing the family focus, there's probably like a whole list of things we could talk about that would fit this concept or idea. But when it comes to things that confront families today, time, finances, and discipline rank really high on the list. And so families have troubles or problems with time, finances, and discipline today. And so if families, and think about Christian families, if our families are going to maintain a godly focus, if we're going to maintain a Christ-centered home, then we're going to have to secure our time. We're going to have to redeem our opportunities wisely. We're going to have to secure our finances and do the very best that we can with what we got. And, of course, securing our discipline. Do a lot of teaching, a lot of instruction, and a lot of teaching instruction about the things of God. I'll stop there. Appreciate so much your attention this morning, and Lord willing, we'll look forward to talking about some other subjects related to homeland security.